Welcome to the most relaxing bedtime stories for adults you'll find anywhere. Tonight's sleep story takes you deep into ancient Egypt, where pharaohs lives more disturbing than any nightmare. If you're looking for bedtime stories for adults that combine fascinating history with the perfect sleep-inducing pace, you've found your new favorite channel. Before we dive into these ancient Egypt sleep stories, hit subscribe if you love relaxing history that helps you fall asleep fast. Comment below and tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And what's your favorite type of sleep story? Asterisk, it's 1500 BCE, and you're about to witness what really happened behind the golden walls of ancient Egypt's most powerful rulers. This isn't just another history lesson. It's one of those deep sleep stories that reveals the shocking truth about pharaohs that most people never learn. Let me paint you a scene that's perfect for tonight's bedtime story for adults. Dawn breaks over the limestone walls of Thebes, where our pharaoh begins another day of absolute power and absolute terror. The king awakens not to an alarm clock, but to blind musicians serenading the sunrise, because in ancient Egypt, even waking up was a sacred ritual. Barefoot servants glide through torchlit halls, their footsteps silent as whispers, carrying trays laden with the finest delicacies. But here's what makes this different from other sleep stories about ancient civilizations. The pharaoh's morning routine was actually a carefully choreographed dance with death itself. Every single movement had to be perfect. Enter a room with your left foot first. That could bring chaos to the entire kingdom. Let your shadow fall across a statue of a god. You might doom Egypt to famine and war. This is the kind of fascinating yet soothing historical content that makes the perfect adult bedtime story, where every detail matters, but delivered at just the right pace to help you drift off. Now, as this relaxing sleep story continues, let's explore what archaeologists have discovered about the pharaohs' private lives, secrets that would make even the bravest souls shudder. The pharaoh emerges from his bedchamber, but he's not alone. An entire team of body servants has spent the last hour preparing him for godhood. They've shaved every hair from his body, not for fashion, but to prevent lice in the desert heat. His eyes aligned with coal-black coal and green malachite, creating that iconic Egyptian look we recognize today. But here's where our adult bedtime story takes a darker turn. That gold gleaming at his throat and wrists, it was often melted down from the jewelry of conquered enemies. Those perfumed oils anointing his skin, they contained ingredients that would be considered toxic today. This is exactly the kind of historical sleep content that helps busy adults unwind, disturbing enough to be fascinating, but told in that gentle, measured pace, perfect for bedtime. As our sleep story about ancient Egypt continues, we need to talk about something that modern audiences find particularly shocking: the pharaoh's family relationships. To keep the royal bloodline pure, pharaohs routinely married their own sisters, half-sisters, and sometimes even their daughters. This wasn't just accepted, it was required by law and religion. Take Pharaoh Akhenaten, whose story reads like the most twisted family drama you've ever heard. This makes for perfect content for adults who love bedtime stories with historical intrigue. Akhenaten married his own daughter, Ankhesemen, after his queen Nefertiti mysteriously disappeared from all records. Modern DNA analysis has revealed the horrifying consequences of these marriages. King Tutankhamun, probably the most famous pharaoh of all time, suffered from severe genetic deformities. His spine was curved, he had a cleft palate, and his immune system was so compromised that a simple infection likely killed him at just 19 years old. This is the kind of educational sleep content that makes you think while helping you relax. Perfect for those nights when you want to learn something new as you drift off to dreamland. Here's where our bedtime story for adults gets truly chilling, and why this ancient Egypt sleep story will stay with you long after you wake up. The pharaohs were so obsessed with their afterlife that they committed acts that would be considered murder today. When a pharaoh died, it wasn't just his body that was mummified and buried. Recent archaeological discoveries have uncovered what experts call retainer sacrifices. Dozens of servants, concubines, and even beloved pets were killed and buried alongside their divine master. Their bodies were positioned as if they were still serving, waiting hand and foot on their pharaoh for all eternity. Pharaoh Jer's tomb contained the remains of 338 people, men, women, and children, who were sacrificed so he wouldn't be lonely in the afterlife. Imagine being a servant in ancient Egypt, knowing that your pharaoh's death meant your own. This is exactly the type of dark, historical content that makes for compelling sleep stories, horrifying enough to hold your attention, but delivered in that gentle, storytelling voice that helps busy minds finally quiet down for the night. No collection of bedtime stories for adults about ancient Egypt would be complete without talking about Tutankhamun, the pharaoh whose tomb discovery created a media sensation that lasted decades. When Howard Carter first peered into Tut's tomb in 1922, he saw wonderful things, but he had no idea just how wonderful and terrible they really were. The tomb contained over 5,000 individual objects, from golden chariots to the pharaoh's childhood toys. But modern science has revealed the tragic story behind all that gold. CT scans show that Tut was likely killed by a blow to the head, possibly murdered by his own advisors who wanted to control Egypt's throne. The famous curse of the pharaohs that supposedly killed Carter's team. Pure media hype. But the real curse was genetic centuries of inbreeding that created pharaohs who were physically and mentally damaged from birth. This makes for perfect, relaxing historical content for adults who want to learn while they unwind. The truth is often stranger and more disturbing than any fictional curse. Our sleep story about ancient Egyptian rulers wouldn't be complete without Hatshepsut, one of the most successful pharaohs who happened to be a woman. In a world where women weren't supposed to rule, Hatshepsut didn't just break the rules, she completely rewrote them. She wore the traditional false beard of kingship, bound her breasts to appear masculine in official artwork, and ruled Egypt for over 20 years during one of its most prosperous periods. But here's what makes her story perfect for adult bedtime stories with a twist. After her death, someone tried to erase her from history entirely. Her successor, likely her own stepson, had her name chiseled off monuments and her statues smashed for over 3,000 years. Hatshepsut was lost to history until modern archaeologists pieced together her incredible story from scattered fragments. It's like the ultimate historical mystery, solved one broken statue at a time. This is the kind of inspiring yet relaxing content that makes the best sleep stories, tales of people who overcame impossible odds, told in that gentle pace that helps you drift peacefully to sleep. As our ancient Egypt sleep story continues, we encounter Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to change 3,000 years of religious tradition overnight and nearly destroyed Egypt in the process. Imagine if someone today declared that all religions were false except for one they just invented. That's essentially what Akhenaten did when he proclaimed that only Aten, the sun disk, was the true god of Egypt. He didn't just change the religion, he moved the entire capital city to a remote desert location, banned the worship of traditional gods, and even changed his own name from Amenhotep IV to reflect his new beliefs. This makes for fascinating bedtime content for adults. because it shows how one person's obsession can affect millions of lives. The priests who had served Egypt's gods for centuries were suddenly unemployed. Temples that had stood for thousands of years were abandoned. But here's the truly disturbing part of this sleep-friendly historical tale. When Akhenaten died, his revolution died with him. His son, the boy who would become Tutankhamun, spent his short reign desperately trying to undo his father's damage. No discussion of bedtime stories about ancient Egyptian pharaohs would be complete without Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Though Ramses the Incredibly Vain might be more accurate, Ramses ruled for 66 years and spent most of that time building monuments to himself. He fathered over 100 children with dozens of wives and concubines, not out of love, but to create as many potential heirs as possible. But here's what makes his story perfect for relaxing sleep content. Ramses was so obsessed with his own legacy that he literally stole credit for monuments built by previous pharaohs. He'd have their names chiseled off and his own carved in their place. The massive statues he erected of himself, some over 80 feet tall, were essentially ancient billboards advertising his own greatness. Imagine driving through Egypt 3,000 years ago and seeing giant stone versions of Ramses everywhere you looked. This is exactly the type of historical personality that makes for engaging adult sleep stories, larger-than-life figures whose egos were so massive they're almost comical by today's standards. Our bedtime story for adults reaches its climax with Cleopatra VII, the last true pharaoh of Egypt, and perhaps the most misunderstood ruler in history. Forget everything Hollywood has told you about Cleopatra. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the world. Ancient sources describe her as average-looking, but incredibly intelligent and charismatic. She spoke 9 languages fluently, was educated in mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric, and was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who actually bothered to learn Egyptian. But here's what makes her story perfect for sleep stories about powerful women. Cleopatra understood that in her world, survival meant playing the most dangerous political game ever invented. She allied herself with Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony, not because she was a seductress, but because she was a brilliant strategist trying to save Egypt from Roman conquest. As our ancient Egyptian sleep story draws to a close, let's contemplate the lasting mystery of the pharaoh's rulers who believed they could cheat death itself. For over 3,000 years, the pharaohs built increasingly elaborate tombs, developed complex mummification processes, and accumulated vast treasures, all in service of one goal: achieving true immortality. In a strange way, they succeeded. Names like Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, and Ramses are more famous today than most modern world leaders. Their monuments still draw millions of visitors each year. But perhaps the real lesson of this bedtime story about ancient Egypt's god-kings is simpler: that no amount of power, wealth, or divine pretense can change the fundamental human condition. The pharaohs, for all their gold and glory, faced the same fears, desires, and mortality that we all do. They just had more dramatic ways of dealing with them. And that brings us to the end of tonight's bedtime story for adults about the fascinating and disturbing world of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. I hope this sleep story has given you plenty to think about as you drift off to peaceful dreams. If you enjoyed this ancient Egypt sleep story, make sure to subscribe for more bedtime stories for adults that combine history, mystery, and the perfect sleepy pace. What pharaoh story fascinated you most? Leave a comment and let me know what historical sleep stories you'd like to hear next. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be more peaceful than any pharaoh's eternal slumber in their golden tombs.